Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Yes, You Can Work, a presentation by the ARC of New Jersey. We are very lucky to be joined today by Adam Kubler, the Director of Project Hire. If you're unfamiliar with the ARC of New Jersey, they are a fantastic organization that advocates for and educates about the needs and rights of those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, making Project Hire the perfect inclusion to bring awareness to the significance of a diverse workforce. Project Hire aims at integrating individuals into part-time and full-time employment and providing an opportunity for them to earn a competitive wage and gain confidence in their abilities. So without further ado, please allow us to give a warm welcome to Mr. Kubler.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Adam. I'm the Director of Project Hire. Project Hire is one program actually of many at the ARC of New Jersey. But Project Hire is the supported employment arm, you could call it, of the ARC of New Jersey. We are the largest provider of this service and the oldest. That actually makes us the first provider of this service in New Jersey. Our current executive director actually started Project Hire almost 40 years ago with the first placements. He was the first job coach. And so it's very much a big part of the agency and really important because the ARC of New Jersey's main mission really is to help folks who live with disabilities integrate into the community. We really believe that that improves the lives of the folks who live with disabilities as well as the rest of the society, because diversity is always a good thing and just enhances the world we live in. And so my program, we see employment as that. So my presentation is just going to be giving you a bit of information and overview of supported employment, which is kind of the major service that people with disabilities use to obtain and maintain competitive employment. There's two worlds we're going to look at. We're going to look at before graduation, so that's in high school, and then after graduation, which is after high school when you're an adult. And so for some folks listening to this, the school portion may not have as much to do with you, but the adult will. So just hang on and we'll get there. For others, it's really important to know the adult side because what happens in school is a lot different. And so being prepared for what it looks like on the adult world is very beneficial and will help you get more out of the service. So I am going to share my screen here and get my presentation going. So here we go. So yes, you can work. So the topics discussed, like I mentioned, there's two parts. We have our part one, which is before graduation. We're going to cover why work competitively at all. You might be asking yourself that question. Entitlement versus eligibility. Where does employment start and what can I do? Transition. So what type of services are available to help individuals transition to adulthood? And then finally, the ARC of New Jersey programs that can help with that. Then part two is after graduation. So who pays for services? Where do you go for services? So who can help? We'll cover that. What are the services that are available? Talk a little bit about our adult program. And then I'll give you a list of resources and then we can answer questions. So for some on this call, it may be very obvious, for others it may not, but an obvious question here is why work at all? That's because, like we said, our mission in general is to help folks who live with disabilities to integrate into the community. Specifically, employment, we believe, helps with these types of things, friendships, respect, independence, success, pride. These are all important things, achievement, identity, growth, really, they all are the same thing. It's that these items all point to a better quality of life. And so that is the major reason to work. And you might be thinking about that this reason is no different than anybody who lives with a disability versus living without a disability. It's the same reason. It's a better quality of life to be in the community, participating and earning for yourself and gaining that respect and self-determination that comes from that. New Jersey is what is called an employment first state, and I put it in parentheses because it actually is an official title that the state uses to kind of frame a lot of rules and frame a lot of the policy that goes into how folks with disabilities get to work in New Jersey. So the initiative, it presumes that people with disabilities can and should work. It creates an expectation that the people with disabilities, just like anyone else, opt out of employment rather than opt in. Guides the policy and resources related to the employment of persons who live with disabilities, and it really helps define that primary service on the adult side that folks living with disabilities utilize to find employment. It's called supported employment. That's kind of the key word, vocab word to get out of this presentation if you get one thing. So as I mentioned, we're going to start in the high school level. And so why prepare at all? Why would I even start talking about this? Well, preparing a student really does help them better acclimate to the vocational services after graduation. The adult services are so much different than the services received in school. One kind of philosophical movement a lot of people are coming from is that when you're in school and in high school, the services you receive related to employment and vocational are an entitlement. And on the adult world, they're an eligibility-based system, and it really does impact the service models. So what your school may call a job coach could very likely be very different on the adult side. So just some basic kind of comparisons here as we get started to kind of give you an idea of what I'm getting at. Entitlement. In an entitlement program, these are legally provided. They have to be provided to all those who are eligible. Entitlement program like school, it's required to be provided until a designated date or a student reaches a certain age. Funding for alternates is provided in an entitlement system. Because you're entitled to it, there needs to be a support system in case someone is sick, someone is on vacation, things like that. In an eligibility-based system, these items are a little different. In an eligibility-based system, participants may qualify, but the services are not guaranteed for a lot of different reasons. Some of which I just mentioned, people are sick, on vacation. If there are not backup staff, sometimes those services are not able to be provided. Eligibility is reevaluated. So in an entitlement system, you're required to provide it. In an eligibility-based system, your eligibility is reevaluated constantly. So you always have to maintain eligibility to continue receiving the service. And then service availability is not guaranteed. It can be determined by agency availability. For example, there may be a service out there that there's no one to provide it. Hopefully that's not the case, but that's just an extreme example where you could run into that in an eligibility-based system. Service differences, the word job coach. I just see this out in the community, and sometimes I like to make sure that it's clear that a lot of times what you're seeing in a school, they call a job coach what truly is more of an aid. And so a job coach in the school system may be there 100% of the time, helping the person with every single task. A job coach in the school system will be provided until graduation, regardless of need. So let's say the individual really doesn't need a job coach, but the job coach may be there because they have their obligations to have someone with the students. Students ultimately answer to school staff regarding issues. If they have a bad day or something's not working, they go to their school staff, and that's who handles most of those issues. So things like underperformance, attitude, behavior, scheduling, it's all handled by the school. In the adult world, the job coach, according to the adult funding, 100% coverage, like someone working one-to-one as a job coach, is not usually possible for the long term. There are a lot of different reasons for that. Some of it's just plainly availability. It's also service definitions. Job coaching in the adult world is very much meant to fade back. Just like I mentioned here, so services are designed to fade. So not until graduation, they're designed to fade. And then when you're working in the community, you answer to your employer, just like anybody else. That's who you're talking to if you have an issue, and that's who's talking to you if you have an issue with performance. And then finally, some of the last differences here are some of those ancillary school services that sometimes can be honestly taken for granted in a community setting. So an ancillary school or an ancillary school service may be by behavioral adjustments, hygiene, task prompting. These are all things that are provided by aides and school aides in the school setting. Behavior modifications and IEPs are implemented where people know about them and must follow them according to those IEPs. And the work environments are going to allow a lot of supports, just because generally they know the drill. They've got students coming in regularly. And transportation is almost always provided in the school system. In the adult world, that is not, these are some things that may not be included in a lot of supported employment. I'm not saying you can't get them. It's just that the job coach doesn't do these. So job coaches are not funded to monitor behaviors, complete hygiene functions, or prompt tasks. So task prompting is a big one, where it's a big misconception that a job coach is there to facilitate the work, and the way the services are defined in the adult world, it's actually not their ultimate goal. And the idea is those types of supports are faded. Employers consider accommodations and decide if they accept them. They're not really worried about the IEP. They're not worried about different behavioral adjustments. They have the opportunity to decide if they can accommodate what accommodations are being asked. And finally, the competitive work, like a truly competitive work environment, that means fair work, fair pay, doesn't always allow for lots and lots of supports. You know, having 4 people with 1 person isn't always a realistic thing in the competitive world. It can happen totally. It just can make it's a bit messier when it comes to the adult world. So in summary, I'm really not trying to discourage. I know it may seem like that, but I'm really not. The idea is to encourage you to seek out opportunities that expose you or your child to situations to develop independence. The key is to be aware that that's on the horizon, and developing those skills is just so important. So employment supports in the adult services are geared, defined, and designed to fade back as much as possible as skills increase. And this can be a big change. So what I'm getting at is that lack of exposure to real work environments and realistic support arrangements can lead to a learned dependence on direct support staff that the current systems in the adult world just don't support. This is especially tragic because so many folks, if given the chance, really can achieve a higher quality of life when given the chance. Sometimes it's that people just need to step back a little bit and allow people to explore. So where do we start? How do you get ready for competitive employment? Well, like with any problem, you really need to define the goal first. So what is our ultimate goal? And for this presentation and this service, supported employment, it's competitive integrated employment. That's the goal, is you want to get to that point where someone's working in a job that's fair work, fair pay in the community. So what does that mean? Competitive employment, this is the placement of a person in an individual employment situation according to the person's interests, vocational skills, and ability. Working hours for those competitively employed are determined by the requirements of the employer. Individuals are paid directly by the employer at or above minimum wage, and the job duties provide real value and are defined by the employer's job description in an integrated work environment. When I say integrated, it's referring to those folks living with disabilities and those who do not. So the work environment needs to have both folks living with disabilities and without working in the same position, or else the state and different funding groups may not consider it to be a competitive situation. So this is kind of a visual representation of setting this foundation of getting to independent employment. So the bottom of the foundation, the most basic part, the most important part really, is developing those independent skills, completing tasks without prompt, finding strategies to do that. And that's where school is great for that, because there's lots of room to experiment, try different things to see what works. Getting to that point where someone can complete a task without someone prompting each step is so key in getting competitively employed. Because if you think about it, regardless of the job, any employer is looking for someone who can do that. So once you've developed those, then we start looking into skills and interests and weaknesses too. And this is all during school, where you can try different things and try something you don't like or try something you do like, and explore to really start defining what that's going to be. Then finally, we start seeking experiences to develop those skills. So the idea is that, okay, you're interested in this job, then perhaps we should try a job sample in that job, or a job shadow, or do something, explore it in some way. And then finally, where the rubber hits the road, it's networking. Disability or not, who you know will always impact where you work. So once you kind of know what those goals are, now it's time to meet people who can connect you with those goals and help increase the chances of finding that. So the idea is this foundation is worked at anywhere. The skills can be developed in all sorts of places, and I'll give you some examples here. So the first thing of that foundation is really developing independence of assigned tasks. So one big, huge thing that can really help is using chore lists or tasks or charts or responsibilities, because these are tools that a job coach uses to help someone become independent at work. And so by getting that started, that, oh, you use the task list to remember the steps to something, or you use the calendar to know that on Tuesdays, I've got to take out the garbage. These things are all great places to start, and they just can happen anywhere. So catch that vision as early as possible. And that's where you're looking for those skills and strengths and developing that. Identify those interests also, because of course, if you're interested in it, it's going to motivate you to go further. And always ask, what do you want to be when you grow up, and consider what kinds of experiences would someone need to achieve that goal. And that's where you start. So some things to do at home. Definitely household activities independently, trying to give people that chance to do things and remember on their own what are the steps to, setting the table or doing things like that. You can develop those things. Here's some examples there: meal prep, sweeping, laundry, whatever it happens to be. Anywhere at any time, look for those things. Be your own coach. And the reason why it develops all of those skills that will be used in the community. In the community, always think about persons that you or your child may know. Attend community events, volunteer. Recreation departments are great. Animal shelters, food banks, all these places have places to get to volunteer. And this isn't necessarily just just because you're interested in being a fireman doesn't mean the only thing you can get out of going to the firehouse would be that, is that you will meet other volunteers who may be in other positions who can help you. And so getting out and exposing yourself to the community is such a great way to network. And by building that relationship, you'll become aware of those resources and interact with the community. Some things to do at school, talk to mentors. I've seen a lot of schools now have mentoring and peers that can help people think about different things. Join clubs, obviously going on trips or special events, assemblies. These are all ways to just expose yourself to the public and get a network going. After school, sports are a great way. That's a great way to network. You meet lots of different folks that way, or lessons. Go to the gym. That's another big one. You can try it at the recreation departments, fitness centers. Hopefully as things more open up, this will be more available. But these are all great ways to develop teamwork and listening skills. Because really just remember what makes you a good friend, athlete, teammate, student, volunteer really does make you a great employee. These are all universally valued things for any employer. So now let's talk about the actual transition services. So these are actual services that are available for folks for that school to work. So these are things that you could get through your school district. The first thing that's really important is that IEP, because that's where it all lives. New Jersey does require that students age 16 and older or younger have an individualized IEP or education plan that can contain a transition plan that will address the student's interests, aptitude, and their future plans regarding post-secondary education, career, housing, independent living. The IEPs also can contain transition services and course of study. So this is the first place to go. This is where you got to get all that down and on paper so that the plan is there and you can start pursuing. So when discussing the IEP, ask questions, always ask questions, identify those classroom options that are employment-based that you can talk to the people facilitating the IEP. A good transition program really should include some sort of development of skills in the community, because skills built in the community are easily turned into sustainable job skills. So make sure activities in the community are realistic. That's very important too, is that just because you're out, if you're with 30 of your classmates in kind of a sheltered environment, well, it's not the most realistic setting, and we might not be getting the most realistic assessment of how things are going. And then finally, something that I do think gets forgotten a lot, but it's been improving, connecting with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services before graduation. DVRS is also what they're referred to, is really expanding the services available to students. They've really done quite a bit in the last few years. And so it's so important to get connected with adult services early, because not only are there some services you can get while you're still in school, after school, if your case is already open, it's kind of one less thing to do, and you can get right into the adult services without a big delay. So what specific transition services are available? Every single school district is different. It's going to be based on the community, based on the school, based on their design. So these are just some kind of industry buzzwords that you can ask that hopefully will kind of give you people doing the IEP some ideas of what you're asking about. The first one, which is really important, I'm just going to focus one, the rest of them will just be on one slide, but community-based vocational assessments. It's so important to know what this is, especially early on. So a community-based vocational assessment, it's really designed to determine an individual's level of vocational performance, interest, training needs, and the supports. So the assessments utilize a community-based worksite where information is gathered from an actual worksite in the community in a realistic setting. The assessment is great because you can set up what's called like a vocational baseline. So the idea is, once you know where the individual is at as far as it being in the community, you can use that to develop more intensive and relevant experiences through the school years. It identifies needs and strengths that the school may not have been aware of because the student is always in a supervised setting. So besides that, these are some other ones that you can ask about. School to work programs, job touring, observations, job shadowing, sampling, volunteer opportunities, internships, summer programs, summer work, part-time work. These are all things that you can ask to see if they have, and that should at least get you down the path of finding out what services they do offer. There are some services that you can get outside of the school district. So the options will almost always require some sort of approval from your school district, just because, and they're going to have eligibility requirements, and they're going to differ in each county and each city, just depending on what's available in the local community. So the first one here is pre-employment transition services. These are those Division of Vocational Rehabilitation services that are available to students that are still in high school. So DVRS, they are required to spend 15% of service dollars on students preparing to graduate. So that's a big number. These services are approved on a case-by-case basis, but interested individuals can, or their guardian can even refer themselves using the DVRS website. I'll have that link at the end of our presentation. But ultimately, the services are authorized by the local pre-ETS supervisor and then administered by other provider agencies. So what will happen is DVR, someone there will approve the service, and then there are different service providers, ones like Project Hire out there, who provide these services depending on where you are. Services can be individual, they actually can be group oriented as well, and they include these 5 core services. There's work-based learning experiences, job exploration, workplace readiness training, self-advocacy and mentoring, counseling on enrollment in post-secondary education. So what is noted here is that pre-ETS services specifically are not able to replace any services already provided by the school. So if your school does these things already, it is possible that the DVR supervisor would say, no, we can't approve because your school does these already. But if your school does not do these things, this is a great way to get them. And it's very low cost, doesn't cost the school anything, doesn't cost you anything either. The ARC of New Jersey's Project Hire, that's my program. We actually are certified to provide supported employment services in schools. So some of the things that we've done in the past, we've done community-based vocational assessments. Like I said before, that's that assessment of someone's ability to work in the community. We've done some community-based instruction, Job sampling, that's our bread and butter. We do a lot of that. And then we are approved for some pre-ETS services depending on where you live. So if you are interested in those, you can talk with your child study team and they can just reach out to me and I can talk to them about rates and things like that. We also have the ARC of New Jersey's Planning for Adult Life program, or PFAL. Planning for Adult Life, it's a grant-funded program, so it doesn't cost anyone anything, by the Developmental Disabilities Division. It assists young adults and their families with charting a life course. So they have different resources, different classes, different settings. They'll talk about things like post-secondary education, employment, housing, legal financial planning, different eligibility for different programs and self-direction, all sorts of stuff. If someone's interested in that, have the child study team reach out to Ms. Teresa Maseko. Her information's here, and it'll also be at the end of the presentation. Planning for Adult Life has another program they do called Making Action Plans for Life. These partner with high schools directly, and they meet with students twice a month in a classroom setting, and they do a transition curriculum. So they do small group activities and different things like that to help people identify those goals and strengths that they do to set life goals for the future. Once again, if you're interested, you can, or your child study team can reach out to Teresa Maseko. They're in high schools all across the state. It's been real successful. So that is the conclusion of our high school portion. So those are where to start, what's available, what to think about when you're in high school as far as transitioning to employment after graduation. Now we're going to jump into the adult world of what is out there. So after graduation, let's discuss who helps. So first thing, don't forget, keep networking. So even after graduation, a lot of your resources that you had in school still may be able to assist. So don't forget, the child study team is there. Sometimes they can offer advice and have experience. Definitely talk to other parents, very important. And then service providers, such as Project Hire. A lot of times people call me and I can walk them through certain things to getting services. So the state agencies, though, that officially are out there to help folks who live with disabilities obtain and maintain employment are going to be, the main one is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, which we already talked about earlier. The Division of Developmental Disabilities, Division of Disability Services, the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and finally, Department of Children and Families. They provide more kind of ancillary services that are outside of employment, but it helps people keep those jobs by kind of stabilizing other parts of their lives. So we're going to talk about the major players here. The first one is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. This really is the primary place for anybody living with any sort of impediment to employment to go to get help to find a job. So they will be assigned a voc rehab counselor who can offer them different services like vocational counseling, placement, training, supported employment, community-based work evaluations, job seeking skills, accommodation, skills training, all sorts of cool stuff, even vehicle and home modifications in some scenarios. But this is the primary place people go. The vocational rehab counselors do not actually provide these services. They just authorize them to different providers in the community that will actually provide the service. The sister agency of the Division of Voc Rehab is the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. This is an agency that specifically works with folks who live with visual impairments. So they do a lot of the same things that the typical Voc Rehab does and more. So they do more stuff geared towards folks who have visual impairments. Next, the secondary funder of supported employment services in New Jersey is the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So the Division of Developmental Disabilities, they provide public funding for services that assist New Jersey adults with developmental disabilities age 21, that's really key, and older to live as independently as possible. So the services and supports similar to the DVR arrangement where an individual is approved by DDD, but the people who actually provide the services are community providers like Project Hire. So in order to get DDD, there's actually two parts to it. You have to receive Medicaid and meet DDD's eligibility of need. Even if you qualify for DDD though, not everyone does, but if you do, still the first place you need to go for supported employment is DVR. That might sound kind of confusing. We're going to walk through that step so you can figure out where you or your loved one kind of fits in that scheme. So just on continued, so like I mentioned, in DDD services, when you do get them, you receive a budget based on your diagnosis and level of need. And then what happens is you'll be assigned, or you choose a support coordinator who takes that number and you decide which services it should go towards. And one of those services can include supported employment. Now, this is not a presentation on SSI, Medicaid, and other benefits, but I do want to mention, if you or your child is working, they're able to earn significantly more income than SSI can provide. And New Jersey really has, it might be the most generous Medicaid buy-in program in the country. There are individuals in New Jersey right now who are able to earn up to 60 grand annually and maintain less than 20,000 in assets, and that does not include a primary residence or a vehicle, and still maintain Medicaid. It's a process, but you can do it. And it really is very generous here as far as allowing people to continue to receive Medicaid so they can continue to receive those DDD benefits when it applies. There is a great organization out there, njwins.org. It's completely free benefits counseling. And so sometimes that's a good place to call if you have specific questions. They're actually unveiling a lot more supports in that area to help people navigate that. So now the big service, so supported employment. This is the service that people living with disabilities use to maintain and obtain employment in New Jersey all the time. So while it does differ slightly between who's paying for it, because different folks pay for it, supported employment, the main goal is to assist individuals in obtaining competitive employment in that integrated setting, or working towards competitive employment that's consistent with their skills and interests. So some things that supported employment professionals do: they do assessments, they do job development, which is looking for work. Job sampling might be trying different positions on a short-term basis. Job coaching, which is helping someone learn a job. And then customized employment, which can be talking with employers to carve positions based on someone's abilities. And then long-term support, so kind of a check-in, not a significant amount of hours, but a check-in for the long term. So in New Jersey, you heard me mention it before, the Division of Voc Rehab and DED both pay for supported employment. And that is confusing because some people qualify for both, some qualify for one, some qualify for the other. How the heck do we sort that out? Well, there's a memorandum of understanding between the agencies. And so there's primary and secondary funders of the service. So the primary funder of supported employment, it really is DVR. So what that really means is that in just about all cases, this is the agency that's going to fund the initial supported employment services. So primary, initial. That means looking for work and temporary increased support during the first days of hire. So right when you get a job, they can help to have a coach there in what's called an intensive arrangement, where they're there for a good portion of the time to really help things along and get that person stable. The secondary provider, when applicable, is the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So traditionally, they cover long-term support. So that can be kind of confusing. So I made this diagram to walk you through it. So as far as people who living with disabilities who need supports to obtain or maintain a job, there are three different types of folks that qualify. You have people with very little need, you have people with some need, and people with very severe need. So people with very little need are going to generally only qualify for DVR. And the reason is that they may have some sort of medically documented barrier to employment. However, their level of need is really not high enough to qualify for the DDD definition of services. It's a huge misconception out there that people need to qualify for DDD to get DVR or vice versa. It is not true. People can be just DVR, they can be just DDD, and they can be both. So people with some needs, these are folks who may qualify for both. They have a pretty high level of need, but DVR determines them as able to do their program too. So these are the people that qualify for both systems. And then finally, there's people with very significant needs. So these are folks that may need more of a one-to-one support to maintain a job. That's a very general statement, but generally that's what I've seen out there. And so these folks with the significant needs, they're going to qualify for DDD, but DVR is going to say your level of need is just too high. I don't think we can help with services. So if someone has very little need and they only qualify for DVR, they have their pre-placement and intensive, that primary service will then be paid for logically by DVR. Over here though, people with some needs who qualify for both systems, they must go to DVR first, even though they qualify for DDD. You can't go straight to your DDD budget. You're supposed to go to DVR to see if you can get services there. So those people who qualify for both are going to have that pre-placement and intensive still funded by DVR. But what about these folks that have a very significant need that DVR says, you know what, we aren't able to pay for those services? You're not out of luck. It's just a little different. You're going to need to talk with your support coordinator about supported employment. And then it comes out of your budget instead of from VR because they're not paying for it, obviously. Then finally, moving on to that, once that primary service is done, we go to the long-term or secondary service. So the secondary service, if you have very little need, you only qualify for DVR, you get your pre-placement and intensive services funded by DVR. That would make sense that your long-term services would also be funded by DVR. They have a program that provides about 3 hours of support a month for the lifetime of a job. And so that can be a job coach to check in regularly. So for those folks, that's usually perfect. It's just great. Now, for people with some needs who qualify for both systems, here's where that flip occurs. And that's a little bit, can be jarring for some because it's a little bit confusing. But just know that if you qualify for both systems, once you're stable on the job, your long-term services are going to come out of your DDD budget. So your DVR case will close, and then DDD will start as far as supported employment. And then finally, our individuals who have very severe need, the DVR said, you know what, we're just not able to help. Their pre-placement and intensive can be funded by their DDD budget. And once they're stable on the job, then the services are going to be, their long-term supports are funded by their DDD budget as well, because they don't qualify for VR. So that is kind of the way it goes. And so my program, Project Hire, we are approved to provide services in both of these. So we very often help people make these transitions because we're very well versed in it. We work both with DVR and with DDD. Not all providers do. So we are approved to provide services for DVR, CVVI, and DDD. We do job development and job coaching. That's application assistance, employment seeking skills, contact local businesses, resume, cover letter. On the job coaching side, that can be on the job training, development of natural supports, career coaching, and talking with the employer about reasonable accommodations. So if you are interested in that, the first step is to become eligible for one of those two programs, DDD or DVR, and talk to who's in charge. So in DVR, it's your counselor. In DDD, it's going to be your support coordinator, and they can just contact me and I'll get in touch with them and we'll figure out what to do to get it started. So these are just some resources there at the end of it, some good places to start. Otherwise, people are welcome to contact me directly to ask questions as well. And so that really is about it. So I'm going to stop sharing, see if anybody's got any questions.
Great, what a wonderful presentation. So much very valuable information. Does anybody have any questions? If so, you're welcome to put them in the chat. In the meantime, I was curious, are vocational services, when they're provided by the schools, like more selective? Because I know vocational schools in general are more like a job training. So you're getting a lot of your, like your trade school training, things like that. That's what you typically think for vocation. So are they more selective in who they're accepting, or
Yeah,
when you're a child, are they kind of just accepting?
it
And
depends.
hoping?
So yeah, that's a good question. So I can't speak for the vocational schools, but generally what we see, just what I see out there, is that individuals who go to the vocational schools, a lot of times that's considered an out of district placement. And the idea is that the school district has set aside money for those services. So in those arrangements, they're kind of, I think the way that the school sees it is that those vocational schools really should have this part covered and shouldn't really need help from an agency like ours to connect someone to employment, because that's kind of why they're paying them. I'm not saying that's the official answer, but that's just what I've seen. So generally when we're involved, it's going to be a district, like a school district. School will contact us because maybe their program, for example, isn't as integrated as the family would like. Like, so for example, there might be 30 people going to one store. Well, that's not the most realistic environment. We would rather be in a situation where one student gets to work at this place down the street without all their other peers around them. Project Hire
That
is
makes
niche.
sense.
Yeah, so Project Hire is niche for schools. Every program is different. There are programs that absolutely do great large services out there. My program, I would say we definitely are, we like to work with the people that are kind of in between. That's like our niche, is for the people that don't fit anywhere else. That's usually where we go to, because we're so highly individualized. It works out pretty well.
All right, well, that's wonderful. Well, it doesn't look like we have any further questions. We want to thank you again for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to reconnect again in the future. And thank you for everyone who was able to attend tonight.
Yep, thank you.
All right, everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.